Something changed in the Middle East over the past few days, and it wasn't simply another exchange of threats. It was something much more important. For years, every confrontation between Israel and Iran followed a familiar pattern. One side would strike indirectly. The other would respond through proxies. The tension would rise just enough to remind the world how fragile the region had become, but not enough to trigger a full-scale war. That pattern may now be approaching its limit. The real story isn't about a single statement, a single missile launch, or a single diplomatic warning. It's about what happens when a strategy that has worked for decades begins to lose its effectiveness. Every military doctrine has a breaking point. Every deterrence model depends on one simple assumption that both sides still believe escalation is more dangerous than restraint. The moment that assumption begins to disappear, the entire balance changes. To understand why today's situation feels different, we have to go back much further than the latest headlines. For more than 40 years, Israel and Iran have been engaged in what military analysts often describe as a shadow conflict. Unlike conventional wars, this confrontation rarely involved large armies crossing borders or fleets exchanging fire at sea. Instead, it relied on intelligence operations, cyber campaigns, proxy organizations, precision strikes, and economic pressure. Both governments understood that a direct war would carry enormous costs, so both spent decades competing below the threshold of open conflict. That strategy served both sides surprisingly well. Israel focused on slowing military developments it considered threatening while avoiding a regional war. Iran expanded its regional influence through allied organizations across the Middle East, building what many analysts describe as a forward deterrence network rather than relying solely on its own conventional military. Each side accepted a certain level of risk because neither believed total escalation served its long-term interests. But modern deterrence doesn't fail overnight. It usually weakens gradually. One incident raises the acceptable level of risk. Another changes expectations. Eventually, actions that would once have been considered extraordinary begin to look almost routine. When that happens, military planners start asking a dangerous question. If previous responses no longer restore deterrence, what comes next? That question may now be shaping strategic thinking throughout the region. From Israel's perspective, security has always depended on maintaining uncertainty in the mind of its adversaries. Potential opponents must believe that crossing certain lines would bring consequences too severe to justify the attempt. The exact definition of those lines has changed over time, but the underlying principle has remained remarkably consistent. Iran approaches the problem from a completely different direction. Rather than matching larger military powers weapon for weapon, Tehran has invested heavily in survivability, regional partnerships, missile development, and asymmetric capabilities. This approach reflects geography as much as politics. Iran understands that any prolonged conventional conflict would place enormous pressure on its economy and infrastructure. Instead of preparing for a traditional invasion, it is focused on raising the potential cost of military action against itself. Neither approach is irrational. In fact, both reflect classic principles of strategic deterrence. The problem emerges when both sides begin believing that the other no longer finds the existing balance acceptable. This is why military analysts are paying close attention not simply to political statements, but to logistics, force readiness, industrial production, and operational planning. Modern wars are rarely decided by speeches. They are decided by preparation. Consider what a major air campaign would actually require. Long before the first aircraft leaves the runway, planners must coordinate intelligence, electronic warfare, aerial refueling, satellite coverage, maintenance schedules, precision-guided munitions inventories, command-and control networks, and defensive systems protecting their own territory from retaliation. Every successful strike package represents months or sometimes years of preparation. This is where modern military power differs dramatically from public perception. People often imagine war beginning with explosions on television screens. Military professionals know it begins inside logistics centers, intelligence headquarters, maintenance facilities, and planning rooms where thousands of small decisions determine whether an operation succeeds or fails. The same principle applies to missile defense. Intercepting incoming ballistic missiles is among the most technically demanding missions in modern warfare. Every interceptor fired represents years of manufacturing, advanced electronics, expensive propulsion systems, trained operators, and integrated radar networks. Unlike conventional ammunition, these systems cannot simply be replaced overnight. That reality introduces a difficult strategic calculation. Every interceptor launched today is one unavailable tomorrow. Every precision weapon used during one campaign must eventually be replaced through production lines that already face significant demand across multiple regions. This is why military planners often describe industrial capacity as the hidden battlefield of modern conflict. The side capable of producing advanced systems consistently over time frequently gains advantages that are invisible during the opening stages of a crisis, and this is exactly where the broader international picture becomes increasingly important. The Middle East is no longer an isolated theater. Every major development influences energy markets, global supply chains, defense production schedules, alliance planning, and the allocation of limited military resources around the world. Decisions made in one region inevitably affect priorities elsewhere. That interconnected reality means today's crisis is no longer simply about Israel or Iran. It has become a test of how modern military alliances manage simultaneous strategic challenges without exhausting the capabilities they may need for future crises. And that brings us to the question every defense planner is quietly asking. The next phase of this story is no longer defined by headlines. It is defined by choices. And in modern warfare, the most important decisions are often the ones that never appear on television. They happen inside operations centers, logistics commands, intelligence headquarters, and defense ministries, where planners are forced to answer one uncomfortable question if deterrence no longer guarantees stability. What strategy carries the lowest long-term risk? For Israel, that calculation is extraordinarily complex. A major military operation would not simply involve striking a handful of facilities before returning home. Modern integrated air defense systems, hardened infrastructure, dispersed command networks, and underground military installations mean that no single wave of aircraft could fundamentally alter an opponent's capabilities. Any serious campaign would require sustained operations, repeated intelligence updates, electronic warfare support, aerial refueling, cyber coordination, and continuous protection against retaliation. This is where logistics becomes more important than firepower. History repeatedly shows that successful military campaigns are rarely determined by who possesses the most advanced aircraft or missiles. They are determined by who can sustain operations longer: fuel, maintenance crews, spare parts, precision-guided weapons, satellite communications, replacement aircraft components. And industrial production eventually become more decisive than the opening strike itself. That reality changes the strategic equation for both sides. Iran has spent decades preparing for exactly this type of challenge. Rather than concentrating its military infrastructure in a few easily identifiable locations, it has invested heavily in dispersal. Critical facilities have been separated geographically. Missile forces have become increasingly mobile. Underground storage sites, hardened command centers, and redundant communication networks are designed to ensure that even significant military losses do not immediately eliminate operational capability. Military planners refer to this as resilience. Instead of attempting to prevent every strike, resilience focuses on ensuring that enough capability survives to continue operating after the attack. Israel has developed its own version of the same concept. Its layered missile defense architecture combines multiple interception systems designed to engage different categories of threats: intelligence collection, early warning systems, cyber capabilities, and rapid mobilization procedures all exist to reduce the amount of time between detecting a threat and responding to it. The objective is not perfect protection. No modern military believes that is possible, but rather maintaining enough operational capacity to continue functioning under sustained pressure. This is why analysts increasingly argue that any future confrontation would become less about dramatic opening attacks and more about endurance. Who can continue producing advanced weapons? Who can maintain operational readiness after weeks of sustained activity? Who can protect critical infrastructure while continuing offensive operations? These questions may sound technical, but they often decide the outcome of modern conflicts. Industrial production has therefore become one of the most important strategic variables in global security. Precision-guided missiles cannot be manufactured overnight. Advanced radar systems require specialized electronic components. Air defense interceptors involve highly sophisticated supply chains that stretch across multiple countries. Even replacing damaged aircraft requires months of manufacturing and maintenance work. Every modern military understands that stockpiles, production capacity, and supply networks have become strategic assets equal in importance to combat units themselves. This reality also explains why outside powers are watching events so closely. For the United States, any major conflict in the Middle East immediately affects broader global priorities. Military resources are finite. Precision weapons allocated to one theater cannot simultaneously support another. Air defense systems protecting one region cannot instantly appear elsewhere. Every deployment represents an opportunity cost that defense planners must carefully evaluate. European governments face a similar challenge. Over the past several years, Many countries have announced significant increases in defense spending and expanded industrial production. Those investments are real, but industrial recovery operates on timelines measured in years rather than weeks. Building factories, training skilled workers, expanding production lines, and securing specialized materials cannot be accelerated indefinitely, regardless of political urgency. This is one of the defining characteristics of 21st century warfare. Technology has become extraordinarily sophisticated, but sophistication often reduces production speed. Advanced systems deliver exceptional capability, yet they also require longer manufacturing cycles and more complex maintenance. As a result, industrial endurance has once again become a central element of military power. That brings us to the three strategic paths that now appear most plausible. The first is controlled de-escalation. In this scenario, both sides continue demonstrating military readiness while avoiding actions that would make diplomatic compromise politically impossible. Public rhetoric remains strong. Military forces stay on alert. But neither government crosses the threshold that transforms a crisis into sustained conflict. Historically, many regional confrontations have eventually followed this pattern after periods of heightened tension. The second possibility is limited military escalation. Rather than seeking decisive victory, each side conducts carefully calibrated operations designed to restore deterrence without triggering a wider regional war. Precision strikes, cyber operations, intelligence activities, and selective military responses remain confined to clearly defined objectives. This approach carries significant risks, but it also provides opportunities for political leaders to control escalation before it becomes irreversible. The third scenario is the one that concerns defense analysts most, not because it is inevitable, but because history demonstrates how easily it can emerge. Large conflicts rarely begin because every participant actively wants a major war. More often, they develop through a sequence of reactions, misunderstandings, miscalculations, and decisions made under extraordinary pressure. One unexpected incident leads to another. Military responses generate political demands. Political demands increase military commitments. Eventually, events begin moving faster than diplomacy can contain them. Strategists sometimes describe this as escalation momentum. Once created, momentum becomes increasingly difficult to reverse. This is precisely why experienced military planners spend enormous amounts of time studying history. From Europe in 1914 to numerous regional conflicts throughout the 20th century, one lesson appears repeatedly. Governments often believe they can precisely manage escalation. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes they discover that events have developed a logic of their own. That does not mean conflict is unavoidable. It simply means that caution becomes increasingly valuable as uncertainty grows. Ultimately, this story is larger than one crisis or one region. It reflects a broader transformation taking place throughout international security. The era in which globalization alone was expected to reduce military competition has given way to a period where industrial capacity, technological innovation, resilient supply chains, and long-term strategic planning once again define national power. Missiles and fighter aircraft may capture public attention, but behind every visible weapon stands an invisible network of engineers, factories, logistics specialists, intelligence analysts, and industrial planners whose work ultimately determines whether military strategy succeeds or fails. That may be the most important lesson of all. The future of modern conflict will not be decided solely by who fires first. It will be shaped by who prepared longest, who can sustain operations under pressure, and who can adapt faster when circumstances inevitably change. For now, every government involved continues weighing those calculations behind closed doors. The decisions made over coming weeks may influence regional security for years to come, because in modern warfare, the most consequential battles often begin long before the first shot is ever fired.